Okay, welcome,
You all right?
ladies and gentlemen, to our weekly press briefing. Uh, we're starting a bit late, so I'll go straight into this program. We have our presidential candidate, Mr. Kemaraj Ramjitan. We are very fortunate to have our Region 2 RDC Councillor, Mr. Archie Cordes. We have our usual guest, Mr. Dominic Gaskin, who's an NEC member. We have our national coordinator, Mr. Nielsen McKenzie, and also NEC member, Mr. Gerhard Ramsaru. So I'll hand you straight over to Mr. Ramjitan.
Thank you very much, Amar. And I will deal with the first issue, which, as we have entitled it, "The Fishermen's Suffering at the Hands of Pirates is as a result of the PPP civic government's incompetence." The Alliance for Change expresses grave concern that the PPP government still cannot competently protect its fishermen from pirates in the high seas. Come October, the Minister of Agriculture will again celebrate the critical role fishermen play in our economy and national heritage, especially in our own local boat building industry. Yet, the PPP continues to fail fishermen. As more fishermen went missing on August 6th, the AFC notes another PPP promise was broken to the families of these people on their personal security. When will the terror end? The police and GDF have been unable to manage the scourge of piracy and murder on the high seas since they do not possess adequate resources to identify the culprits and conduct continuous patrols. Guyanese continue to be reminded of this scourge on August 6, 2011, when Kemaraj Danpat called Manohar, who was the boat captain and a married father of 4 of number 64 village, his brother Narayan Danpat, 38, called Strimp, a married father of 2, also of number 64 village, Clifford Singh and Udit Narayan Ramnarayan and Suresh Martin went missing in the high seas. The AFC wishes to remind the nation of just a few other instances of piracy where investigations led to the crimes being unsolved. In November 2009, Satruhan Jagdeep Prasad, 53 of Little India, squatting area Karivatan, died during a pirate attack. So did Vasdeo Prasad, 39 of Parika Fasad, East Bank Essequibo, in March 2010. From our research, dozens of others have either died or lost millions of dollars in valuable tools to pirates who conduct their crime with impunity. The fishing industry employs thousands directly and indirectly and brings in billions of dollars to the country. The PPP government, however, is unable to find the resources to set up the police air unit and to enhance the Coast Guards and GDF Air Corps search and rescue capabilities at sea. Yet it could find approximately $1 billion for executive travel, and it cannot legislate, it can legislate for a presidential package approximating $3 million per month. The fishing industry remains a vital sector for creating new jobs and a source of increased export earnings. That is why it is extremely difficult for anyone to comprehend why the PPP continues to leave Guyanese fishermen to the mercy of brazen pirates on the high seas with no tangible solution on the horizon. The AFC's plan to resolve this situation will include the following. 1. Establish a fisheries surveillance and enforcement coordinating committee with suitable representatives of the Department of Fisheries, the Coast Guard, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Customs and Excise Department, the Marine Police, and most importantly, the representatives of the fishermen. 2. Form a police air unit with support from the GDF and will put at the disposal of that unit a search and rescue aircraft that will work to offer greater surveillance of the fishermen at work on the high seas. 3. Will equip all fishing boats with GPS transponders and high-power radios, which they shall pay for over a period of time. All mercy calls with messages of a pirate attack being responded to with the full force of the law. On the broader question of further developing the fishing industry, the AFC shall, 1. conduct an equipment audit of all fish complex to offer the right incentives to investors to re-energize the industry, such as investments in fish meal plant, more cold storage and ice making capacity to better support the existing fish port complexes. 2, allocate suitable areas of land for aquacultural activities, and arrangements will be made for that land to be held in freehold or in 99-year-old transferable leases. 3, construct National Aquaculture Research Station. The Alliance for Change will engage the fishermen in upgrading the current inadequate policies on the industry and will complete a comprehensive national policy for the stewardship of the ocean, our coast, and the aquaculture industry to cover all areas such as economic development in the industry, a comprehensive needs assessment, but more importantly, a clear policy in search and rescue and coastal surveillance by the law enforcement authorities. This national policy will make more effective use of state resources by addressing the most critical issues facing our fishermen. It will establish a new approach to bringing together central government, regional government, and local government, along with all state agencies and the private sector, to better plan for, manage, and sustain the myriad issues that face the industry. The AFC will also provide access to low-interest capital through the establishment, as we have said before, a state development bank, which will support fishermen and additionally our rice farmers, our millers, as well as livestock farmers. The AFC is all too aware that, like in the sugar industry, the PPP government will provide no leadership and solutions to the many issues troubling the fishing industry. For too long, the PPP has deceived the fishermen of Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. Rambutan.
Over nearly a decade ago, the residents of the Essequibo Coast have been subjected to a very irregular and unreliable ferry service between the Adventure, but now Supernam, and Perica Stelling. Because this practice of dredging the Essequibo Channel was discontinued in this time, there has been the formation of obstructing sandbanks in the areas between Hog Island and Wakinam. This has to be seen as an abysmal failure of the Ministry of Works and Hydraulics. The AFC understand that the MV Stephen, which previously did dredging in the Essequibo Channel many years ago, is currently moored at the Transport and Harbors Department wharf in Georgetown and has been out of operation for the longest while. The AFC notes that the PPP presidential candidate, Donald Ramatar, told residents at one of his recent propaganda stops on the Essequibo Coast that approximately $170 million has been budgeted for capital works in Essequibo for 2011. The Chronicle, in typical propaganda fashion, when it reported this statement by Ramatar, printed that section in bold. However, Ramatar neglected to mention why the Essequibo Channel has not been dredged for nearly a decade. The dredging of the Essequibo Channel was a regular and a routine practice many years ago, intended to efficientize the transportation schedule between the Essequibo Coast and Perica. Because of such regular dredging, the Transport and Harbors Department was able to maintain a regular schedule for the operation of the ferry service. All of this has broken down as a result of the PPP gross incompetence. Because of the sandbanks in the Essequibo Channel, the ferry service plying the Supernam, the Perica route has been limited to 1 trip per day. The removal of the sandbanks would enable at least 2 trips per day. All because the service is at the vagary of the tide. Many times, commuters are forced to wait at the stelling for hours before they can travel. It has been pointed out very clearly here that the majority of commuters using this service are primarily poor people unable to pay on a regular basis the $1,300 charged by the speedboat service. The ferry service is the sole mode of transportation for vehicle traffic between the Essequibo Coast and Perica. This fact alone underscores the difficulty and inconvenience experienced by drivers who cross the channel on a regular basis. It goes without saying that this irregular and unreliable mode of transport is harmful to trade and thus the development of Region 2. The AFC calls on Minister Ben, under whose remit this issue falls, to expedite the dredging of the Essequibo Channel. It is a real shame that such practice, which had become an entrenched routine infrastructural work, has halted completely, causing much hardship and inconvenience to the residents of Region 2. This is indeed tantamount to infrastructural neglect and breakdown of governance. Contrary to what was circulated in the electioneering tour recently made by Jagdev and Ramatar in Region 2, the issue crucial to development have indeed been subject to the PPP endemic incompetence and rampant corruption.
Good afternoon. I'll be reading two press statements today. The first is on Guyana's gold industry. It's called Fixing Guyana's Gold. The AFC has noted recent reports of record levels of declared gold production by the local mining industry. In fact, in 2010, gold accounted for 42% of Guyana's exports, and in 2011 is expected to exceed 50%. The actual increase in declared gold production from 299,000 ounces in 2009 to 308,000 ounces in 2010 represents an increase of 3%, which, while welcome, is not unusual, since year-to-year fluctuations have tended to be much higher than this in the past. On the other hand, the increase in the price of gold on the world market from an average of $972 per ounce in 2009 to $1,224 in 2010 represents a 26% jump and an unprecedented bonanza for the industry. The AFC posits that it is this unprecedented jump that is largely responsible for the $65 million increase in gold exports in 2010 over 2009, which contributed significantly to the 3.6% of real GDP growth experienced in that year. It should be noted that the price of gold on the world market is in no way influenced by the government of Guyana or its policies. According to the Minister of Finance, Dr. Ashni Singh, in his 2011 budget presentation, quote, "The performance of our economy in 2010 was further evidence of the returns that can be had from sound policies and sustained implementation," close quote. He then proceeds to top this off with the claim that, quote again, "the increased output in recent years has relied less on the traditional sectors and increasingly on new and emerging sectors," close quote. When one considers the $40 million increase in Guyana's rice exports in 2010 over 2009, in addition to the $65 million gold bonanza, one is forced to wonder whether he considers gold and rice to be emerging sectors. Guyana has been exporting gold and rice in significant quantities for well over a century. These are very traditional sectors, and the increase in legitimate export earnings from these sectors is what has really saved Guyana from economic decline in 2010. The PPP has been in government for almost 2 decades, and had their policies been really sound, Guyana could today have been benefiting from value-added input to its gold production by means of a gold refinery and a modern jewelry industry. An AFC government will develop modernization and export strategies for the Guyanese jewelry industry aimed at creating jobs, increasing foreign earnings, and transforming Guyana into a regional jewelry center. We will begin by removing all impediments to private sector involvement in gold refining, since access to refined gold and refined gold products is the very basis of a modern-day jewelry manufacturing. We will also engage the necessary expertise required. It is mind-boggling that successive governments have employed scores of experts on sugar, timber, bauxite, and oil, the exports of which combined have never exceeded $500 million per annum. Yet there is not a single person in any state agency or department with any real knowledge of the international jewelry market or even the local jewelry sector. We believe that policymakers without access to expertise in specific sectors cannot create conditions that will guide and encourage investment in these sectors. The following excerpt from the 1997 National Development Strategy is still very relevant today. Quote, consecutive governments have focused policy largely on the foreign exchange potential, particularly of gold, and less so on diamond and semi-precious stones, rather than more comprehensively on the potential contribution they could make to expanding the national manufacturing base. Thank you. I'll also be reading another statement. This one is on the Kevin Simon issue, the young man whose finger got him into trouble recently. It is quite ironic that the PPP claims it is the party for the working class of Guyana and for the youth of Guyana, when it quite hastily held 18-year-old Mr. Kevin Simon without bail for 2 weeks, allegedly for making a lewd manual gesture at the presidential motorcade. It is important to note that these are the actions of a government that is way too full of itself. Can you imagine how many lewd gestures Mr. Obama gets daily? Yet no one is prosecuted there because that is a country that has freedom of speech enshrined in its constitution. The PPP claims it is here for our youth and working hard for our youth. Is this how the PPP will deal with youthful exuberance? The PPP has a penchant for going overboard on minor matters and abusing its powers. This is why it has seen no reason to get rid of the 72-hour holding period, whereby they can hold citizens for minor infractions, and this has been done in a few cases. Now let us contrast this with the 14-year-old Trinidadian girl of African descent, who issued death threats and used obscene language and made racist remarks to Prime Minister Mrs. Kamla Persad-Bissessar over the declaration of a state of emergency in that country and curfew restrictions in some areas. Among her comments were that a sniper would shoot the Prime Minister and leave no evidence. But was the girl locked up? No. Instead, the Prime Minister said, I saw in a newspaper today that there is a 14 or 15-year-old girl. It is alleged that she made some abusive remarks about me on Facebook, and the Attorney General had talked about it and said it was in the hands of the police and the DPP. And then I'm reading today that this young girl has apologized on Facebook. And I would like to say that I am a mother and a grandmother, and this is a teenager. This is a child. And I'm sure you will agree with me when we say that I should meet her and I should accept her apologies. And we should find out why, as a young girl, she felt it necessary to do such a thing. I am not of the view, in the circumstances, that she should be punished in any way. I think we should talk with her and see what help we can be. All these are possible. End quote. Recently, our president referred the youths of Guyana to the Burnham era. While we acknowledge that those were hard times indeed, it begs the question, what has the PPP done for youths in Guyana in its 19 years in office? How many jobs have they created for youths? Why is it that the PPP imports computers when our youth could be building them right in Guyana? Why is there so little vocational training? Why are there no internships in the public and private sectors for UG and other students? How many sports-based education scholarships has the PPP created in 19 years? Have we introduced a program whereby children can win scholarships based on their athletic abilities to go to universities abroad for higher learning, etc.? These, of course, are all things that an AFC government would address. The youth of this country should take a cue from this issue and send a strong message to the PPP in the next election and collectively give the PPP the most powerful gesture ever, which is to get out of office. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'll be reading Acknowledging Amerindian Heritage. The Alliance for Change acknowledges and extends well wishes to the indigenous peoples of Guyana as our nation prepares to observe Amerindian Heritage Month 2011. Historical overview. It has been unearthed that the early Guyanese geography was settled by four main groups: the Caribs, the Akaweos, the Arawaks, and the Warraws. It is a difficult task to date Amerindian presence in Guyana. However, the renowned anthropologist Dennis Williams in 1984, during the course of intensive archaeological work in the northwest of Guyana, discovered a virtually intact 7,000-year-old skeleton of an indigenous Guyanese. The post-Columbian history of our indigenous peoples has to be seen as a facet of the Caribbean and Central American experience of outmaneuvering, oppression, and even elimination. While the early Dutch focused in the Essequibo was on commodity trade with the Amerindian population, there was in fact the enslavement of Guyana's first peoples. The period of the rise of the new plantation economy was also a period of a shift in the cultivation from the hinterland to the coast and the influx of British planters into the Dutch colony. In this new milieu, Amerindians were used as a frontier police force to prevent the runaway of slaves and to subdue maroon communities. They were used to put down the 1823 and other slave rebellions. On the other hand, however, there were examples of Amerindian communities harboring maroons and of alliances, as with a group of Berbice Caribs, between slaves and Amerindians against the planter class. During the mid-19th century, the British colonial approach to the hinterland saw the extension of governance through missionization via the Anglican and Roman Catholic churches. The essential colonial approach could be demonstrated in the events that occurred in the Upper Mazaruni of 1959. The Upper Mazaruni was turned into an Amerindian reservation in 1947. An administrative headquarters was built at Mbaimadai, with William Segar appointed as district officer. A health dispensary was built. Anglican missionary Father John Dorman moved to the district. Malaria and tuberculosis programs were initiated and commodity production encouraged. However, after a diamond find at Mbaimadai in 1959, 1/3 of the Upper Mazaruni district was de-reserved and Amerindians were relocated. In the post-independence period, though there have been concerted efforts at reforming the colonial manipulative policy, much of the disregard for Amerindian interests and concerns were perpetuated. Christopher Carrico, in his paper, Guyana and the Amerindian Question, has pointed out that from the mid-1980s, exploratory rights were granted to multinational mining companies in large expanses of the western half of Guyana without regard to Amerindian village boundaries. Contemporary development issues. In a more contemporary period, it must be recalled that only some weeks ago, Mr. Devroy Thomas from Arau, Region 7, said at one of these very press conferences that, and I quote, "Allow us to make it known that we still have grave problems with 1. The cost of living, 2. Proper running of our schools, 3. Health facilities, 4. Communication and thus access to information, and 5. Transportation," end of quote. On August 14, 2011, we read in the Stabroek News that in Korotuku, Region 7, few can read and write, and that the village was without a teacher for 33 years. John Lewis, a resident of this village, is reported as saying that the Upper Cuyuni, and I quote, is probably the most lawless area in Guyana. Any illegal activity you can think of, it happens there, end of quote. He continued that Korotuku is a village, quote, "It seems that people don't know about us. We don't get any help from anywhere," end of quote. In the AFC's action plan, some of the important policies adumbrated included 1. Review financial proceeds from the LCDS initiative to indigenous communities and engage them in meaningful consultation with the view of initiating relevant economic and social projects of their choice. 2. Expedite land demarcation, new land title applications, and applications for extension of title lands simultaneously after dialogue with the indigenous communities and other stakeholders. 3. Ensure that the indigenous communities benefit from mining, forestry, and ecotourism ventures in their lands and lands contiguous. 4. Review the Amerindian Act of 2006 in partnership with the indigenous communities to address contentious provisions. Cultural preservation. On the cultural front, the AFC recalls that an anthropologist and artist, George Simon, working in a cave in the Pacaraí Mountains, came across an urn with a distinctive carving around its rim of a serpent swallowing its own tail, a symbol of continuity of the cycle of life and death. The vessel contained human bones and was obviously a burial urn. Simon later pointed out that the serpent, or a variation of it, is a symbol of the life force in many cultures. Such discoveries bring to the fore that Guyana's first people were not primitive, quote, unquote, but on the contrary, were and are profound peoples who grappled with serious philosophical questions. The AFC submits that the Caribbean Research Library, the Learning and Research Center, and the Amerindian Research Unit of the University of Guyana, as well as the Walter Roth Museum and the National Trust, all of which are seriously underfunded, must be significantly enhanced and strengthened to better document and preserve the oral and written history of Guyana's first peoples. It is out of this history that our nation will be enriched by the multifaceted components of Amerindian culture and heritage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother Nielsen. I'll be examining the heavy vehicles on our roads. The AFC notes with concern the marked increase in 3- and 4-axle trucks in recent years on our roads. While these 20- and 25-ton trucks may be a sign of progress, a progress that is exemplified in Guyana by the rich getting richer, there are a number of other significant negatives. First and foremost, these vehicles were not meant in any way, shape, or form for our roads, both in terms of weight and speed. They were designed for the highways of North America and Europe. Secondly, the problems are made worse by overloading and what we call hard driving, especially by inexperienced drivers. This leads to much greater than normal damage to our roads and can be seen particularly on the East Bank Highway. The southbound, that is the lane to Georgetown, suffers severely from excessive damage, both in terms of sinking and potholes. There is more. These larger trucks have also forced most of the smaller 7-ton trucks out of business, with very few from just 10 years ago still working today. Further, drivers of 10 and 12-ton 2-axle trucks, in an effort to compete, overload severely. This leads to premature failure of, among other things, engines, gearboxes, axles, springs, brakes, and tires. These are all imported, leading to unnecessary foreign exchange expenditure, which slows our economic growth. Making this worse is that these drivers generally undercharge in relation to the damage their trucks suffer. The AFC, therefore, urges the government to immediately and continuously enforce weight and speed restriction on trucks. We call for separate speed limits for trucks as well, which is normal in many other countries in the world with roads similar to ours. Trucks being allowed to drive at 80 kilometers per hour on our regular roads are but a disaster in the making. Given the present unabated vehicular carnage and the continued exodus of our people, this is something we can ill afford as a young nation needing all hands on deck. Another significant positive from these seemingly simple measures is that small truckers will be able to compete once more as the speeds and weights of the larger trucks are restricted. The AFC government will also set policies to promote articulated or semi-trailer trucks. Traditionally, rigid chassis trucks have been preferred to articulated because of their better performance in bad conditions. Recent innovations, however, such as sliding bogie trailers and various anti-jackknifing technologies, along with lift axles and differential locks, have improved their performance substantially. Articulated vehicles allow for a lower amount of trips with better fuel consumption. Loads can be up to 50% more using the same amount of fuel as a rigid. Better weight distribution, hence less damage to roads and lower tire replacement costs, greater maneuverability, increased reliability. If a tractor breaks down, another can come and replace it, and lower costs the comparable fleet of rigids, since one tractor can pull a variety of trailers. Therefore, if articulated trucks are used wherever they have advantages over rigid chassis trucks, they can add significantly to economic growth with a lower environmental impact and resulting in less traffic at the same time. It can also lead to the establishment of a meaningful trailer industry in Guyana. This embodies the AFC's approach to development in Guyana. Development that will see all our people progress and not just the rich and connected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramsey. Now invite your questions.
Any updates as to elections and I know last year the events in somewhere in November. But is there any updates on that?
We had written to GCOM last week asking them whether or
Pass the microphone.
sorry. Yes, we had written GCOM last week asking them whether they had received the results from their fingerprint cross-matching exercise and whether the investigations into duplicates from that exercise was actually in progress. They haven't yet responded to our letter, so we are waiting for a response. If we don't hear from them by this weekend, we will write them again. But so far, they have said that they're on track. I think that was reported on NCN last week, late last week sometime, and they're on track with their work schedule, and they subsequently reported to us that a November 14th date was the earliest possible election date. So that would indicate that they're on track for a November 14th date, and it is now up to the president to decide what the actual date would be.
Any other questions? Do you have any questions, Mr. Cordes, who is all the way from the Eskimo Coast?
Via speedboat.
All right, thank you for coming.
Until next week. That is surprising. Are you getting questions to ask? We are pretty comprehensive, aren't we?